Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to episode number 454 of For Immediate Release. I'm Shel Holtz.
And I'm Neville Hobson. I'm sure almost every listener to this podcast has heard about the extraordinary encounter between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and US President Donald Trump in the Oval Office on the 28th of February, with US Vice President J.D. Vance stirring the argument. Here's what happened. Right-wing journalist Brian Glenn questioned Zelenskyy's choice of attire rather than focusing on war or democracy during a press conference alongside Trump and Vance. Why wasn't he wearing a suit, they wanted to know. This wasn't an offhand remark, but a calculated attempt to manipulate perception, demonstrating how mainstream media today isn't just about information, but about controlling narratives. In a post on LinkedIn last week, Mark Bukowski highlights a fundamental shift in PR, media, and public discourse, illustrated by the seemingly trivial but strategically loaded question asked of Zelenskyy by Brian Glenn, setting the scene for an ugly ambush on the unsuspecting Zelenskyy by Trump and Vance in front of an assembly of journalists, reporters, and TV cameras. As Politico described it, Trump and Vance both turned on the embattled Ukrainian wartime leader during a remarkably tense exchange, accusing Zelenskyy of failing to express sufficient gratitude for US involvement and overplaying what they said was a weak diplomatic hand. Bukowski argues that the media landscape has fractured, no longer functioning as a singular town square, but as a collection of information silos shaped by algorithms, AI-driven amplification, and engagement-driven clickbait. Traditional PR, once focused on managing reputation and discourse, is now deeply entangled in a performative attention economy that prioritizes spectacle over substance. Trump exemplifies this shift by not just controlling messaging, but orchestrating the entire conversation, selectively choosing which media outlets get access and ensuring that only those who play his game shape the narrative. This, Bukowski warns, is a crisis not just for PR, but for public discourse and truth itself. If PR, media, and politics are now entangled in a world where attention is weaponized, communicators and industry associations must take proactive steps to adapt and uphold credibility. So, Shel, how do you see it all, where you sit in the US?
Well, yeah, I mean, here in the US, this was all anybody was talking about for a few days. But I didn't look at it from the PR perspective until you shared this Mark Bukowski link in our Slack channel. And that led me down quite a rabbit hole. I started dissecting all of this in terms of the implications for public relations and communications. You touched on a few of them. Certainly there's the fragmentation of the media ecosystem. We don't have a town square anymore. We have silos. They tend to be driven by echo chambers, and those echo chambers are driven by algorithms. So organizations trying to reach broad audiences have a problem. So that's one thing to consider. That's also something that we were aware of. There's this shift from message control to conversation control that I teased out of Mark's LinkedIn post. We in PR typically sought to manage a message and shape public perception. That's kind of the role of public relations. Now, as Mark suggests in the article, some figures don't just control the message, they control who gets to ask and what conversations dominate. You referenced that as well in terms of him picking which media get to report on him in person, blocking AP and Reuters because he doesn't like them. But then there's this notion of performative media in PR. We used to focus on crafting narratives for traditional media, but today's media, as characterized by this reporter's question, was an example of spectacle over substance. And the fact that the media reported on that shows that it works. The heckling that Zelenskyy got from Trump and Vance and some of the press in the room wasn't about getting an answer. It was all about engineering outrage. So what does this mean for reputation management? Do PR people need to get ready for performative attacks on their executives, on their brands? I don't have answers to these things. These are questions that as far as I can tell, are just emerging now.
But I think they have to prepare for this kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, there's no question they have to, but how is a question. There's also the suggestion in the article that truth is devalued when attention is the currency. Now, we've all known that attention is the currency with the rise of social media in its current form, with its clicks and its ads and the way the Facebook and the rest of them make money. How do you balance engagement with integrity. There's this pressure to win the attention game. So does that lead us to continue to prioritize clickability over credibility? This is another issue where I think we have to weigh the two sides and make some decisions and implement some processes.
Yeah, I agree. I think you mentioned when I interrupted you earlier about how. I utterly agree. Therein lies the huge dilemma for communicators, because we could come up, and indeed I do have a laundry list. These are the things we need to do. It doesn't have the how. For instance, one of them I've got here is about prioritizing media literacy and narrative analysis amongst your communication team. So it talks about train the teams to identify and counteract disinformation tactics, recognizing when narratives are being manipulated. Great. How do we do this? Regularly audit media sources and influencers for credibility for engagement. That's an easy one, because I'm sure many are doing that now too. But some of these things, I have to admit, are so, almost common sense. Champion fact-based storytelling, for instance. Emphasize accuracy over engagement. Align storytelling with verified sources. And that probably gets, I think, to the heart of the matter on the how. And there are some things that we are, I think, overall, collectively, many communicators are a bit lax on, which is the thorough verification of sources. And so you are not, if you're encountering a situation such as the outcome of that event in the White House, and you're going to report on it, you're going to look at who's saying what about it, you probably got more work to do to verify your sources, because anyone with an opinion is posting, including in the mainstream media, where they might not be as thorough in their verification procedures as they could be, quoting some papers, but I've seen blogs mostly with unverifiable. Well, I was going to say facts. They're not facts. I say their opinion, and most of them aren't right. So again, that just makes it even more essential to do your due diligence properly when you've got this kind of situation that you're trying to address. That's one area.
Another area to consider is that going forward, Zelenskyy going into a meeting with Trump will probably be anticipating this type of an attack. And I think brands and leaders should do the same. Manipulated narratives are going to become a routine tactic in competition, whether it's in the political arena or the arena of commerce. So do we need to shift toward narrative defense strategies in a media landscape where bad faith actors are manufacturing this kind of outrage? If we continue to do, as Mark says in the LinkedIn piece, focus on influencer fluff and corporate vanity metrics, we won't be ready for these. It's pretty clear that in this kind of media landscape, those kinds of attacks are coming. And we have seen the things that start in the political realm migrate their way over. We saw that with deepfakes, for example. First they were in entertainment with ridiculous and just fun stuff. But then they went into politics in order to make you think you were hearing or seeing a politician who never said or did what you heard or saw. But now it's affecting business. So far, it's mostly phishing attacks and the like. But we're seeing this particularly with the AI generated stuff. So, I think there needs to be a shift in the focus of what PR is working on if we want to remain relevant and prepare content that helps us when these kinds of manufactured outrages are targeting the business.
Yeah, I think projecting this out into a business situation, it had got me thinking when I was thinking this through myself, even about how do you anticipate, let's call them weaponized PR tactics by the other side, let's say, and have yourself prepared for that. How do you do that? Well, we've now have a clear indicator of what that looks like, the Trump-Vance ganging up on Zelenskyy. So it wouldn't be difficult to project that out to, for instance, you're a PR agency pitching for a client's business. And this also, I guess, clearly shows how the age of politeness has diminished entirely, where before, if you disagreed, it's polite disagreement. Here you've got a situation where it's outrage and it's anger and it's vulgar and it's the effing and the blinding language going on that in polite conversation you never had. That's changed radically, and that's now common currency. I mean, look at any TV program, a topical series on anything, and the F word is almost it's occupying now the space as, oh damn, we all said many years ago, and that was a rude word, no longer. So all that has shifted radically. So that is your environment. You're making a pitch. And beforehand, what might have happened is that the other side, if they didn't like it, wouldn't say much, but you tell after you've done that they weren't that impressed. Now they tell you in extremely strong terms that you're full of you-know-what. So how do you anticipate that? Well, that's actually not too difficult. So I place that under the heading of anticipate weaponized PR tactics. And that is part of that. You're in a pitch and that's the response you're getting. How are you going to address it? Are you going to say anything about it afterwards? And this is another thing. The kind of traditional non-disclosures and privacy elements are now questionable whether people will observe those. So you got to assume that NDA procedure we had many years ago ain't gonna work anymore. So you've got to take that into account. So the environment has shifted. And if you then look at a product launch, media invited, they've been told not to embargo until so-and-so. That, I'm afraid, I would place no trust in anyone obeying that anymore at all.
You remember Andrea Veckerle and her Civilization efforts
Sure.
to bring civility back into the public online commons. She must be despondent over the state of things right now.
I mean, the politeness thing, I wrote a post the other day about, are you polite to an AI when you're talking to a chatbot? And I argued the case as to why you should be. Yeah.
And I am.
That's part of it.
Well, thank you.
Sure, I do all the time. So that's where we're at. And this is under threat, all these behaviors, by the likes of people like Trump and his supporters, or his sycophants, whatever you want to call them. And people take advantage of that too. So you've got a landscape that is extremely difficult to truly understand based on the rules we've been following for a long time. And this reflects, I see big headlines in some of the tabloids here in the UK. Trump has overturned the world order. Well, he has, frankly, he has. And we have to accept that there's probably no going back on anything now until Trump's gone. But his legacy is going to be that this is actually going to be the norm for quite a while forward, I would say.
Just to come back to the PR implications of this, a couple of additional thoughts. One is that there may be some people who work in media relations or public relations who are watching Trump and wondering if the things that he is succeeding at are worth emulating. And I'm looking at, as we've already discussed, his control of message through controlled access. Is there something that PR people are going to take away from that? Are we going to start to think that we should be controlling who shapes public discourse about our brand, about our products, about our organization? And I'm not sure that's the best tactic to adopt in PR, but there may well be some people who are considering that.
That then presents an opportunity for professional associations to really show their value.
Sure, revise their codes of ethics.
Advocating for responsible media practices, public education campaigns or media literacy, for instance, just a couple of things. Support PR training for this kind of thing.
But also advocating for open access to your content. You're not going to tell a media outlet, no, we don't like the way you report things, so you can't cover us.
Yeah, right. Well, that actually was truly stunning when the AP was banned, but they don't seem to be too alarmed themselves about it any longer after the initial what kind of thing. So it's happened, but it still could happen further. So it is to do with that control. This is getting a bit like, dare I say it, Soviet Union days. I mean, it's extraordinary.
One other article crossed my feeds, and it's tangentially related to this. And I think this is a communications unintended consequence that maybe Trump and Vance didn't consider. And if you're planning on engaging in some of these kinds of tactics, it's a fair warning that this kind of communication might follow. Now, this happens to be on a Substack of somebody that I have never heard of before. He's a Holocaust historian. But this was making the rounds. He wrote a piece called Anti-Semitism in the Oval Office, and it is a rather lengthy and very well documented essay that essentially says that the attack on Zelenskyy was an anti-Semitic attack. Now, I didn't see that. I saw the press conference. I saw it while it was happening.
Is he Jewish, Zelenskyy?
Pardon?
Is he Jewish, Zelenskyy?
Yes, Zelenskyy is Jewish.
Okay, didn't know that.
Yeah, definitely. But what this guy is arguing is essentially that if you look at the laws that were implemented in Nazi Germany at the beginning of the Third Reich, well before they started hauling people off to concentration camps, where they were just trying to marginalize the Jewish population in society. It was exactly the same criticisms that were being leveled at Zelenskyy, the way you dress and things like that. And he documents this extremely well. And this is making the rounds. And if it's gaining traction among populations that are opposed to anti-Semitism, and you listen to the Trump administration talk about its efforts to stem anti-Semitism, a lot of this at universities, which I really think is just targeting universities, finding an excuse to target universities. But you're going to lose some support among some of the people who have been supportive, thinking through what people might say or might do as a result of this action. That, you've been looking at what we get out of attacking Zelenskyy. What do we prospectively lose? Should be another consideration. This goes back to something I talked about years ago, which is in the communication strategic plan. We should have a step that just before launch, we close our eyes, we project 6 months out into the future after we have launched whatever it is that we're going to launch, and say what went wrong. It was a tremendous failure. Why? What failed? And anticipate consequences that you hadn't anticipated before.
There's something that just popped into my mind, a news story I saw this morning about empathy, and how Trump and Musk demonstrate with their words and their deeds a complete and utter lack of empathy. And the article paralleled that with what happened, or what was happening in Nazi Germany at the same time of the period you're talking about. So I'm thinking, well, we would like to see more of this kind of comparison being made. It's alarming, frankly, because I think there's a lot of people are going to say, you know what, I think they're probably right. These guys are like that. I don't know what that says for where we go from here, Shel, frankly, but business is not as usual. That's a fact.
Oh, it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, I think
Count on that. And that'll be a 30 for this episode of For Immediate Release.